But yeah, thank you everyone. Sorry for the delay. We appreciate you joining us today as we discuss further on time and attendance management. So as Tracy said, we have a lot of great information to share with you on how to best prepare for a successful time and attendance project. As I mentioned before, feel free to ask any questions you might have in the questions chat box function on the webinar. And we will answer these questions after, as well as any additional ones you may have. We will share this slide deck after the webinar, and then, yeah, please know that this will be recorded. So I talked a little bit about HR Path, but I don't know if you can change the slide, Tracy. Great, there we go.
Okay. Perfect, thank you guys.
We can see it. Okay, so if you aren't too familiar with HR Path, we are a global HRS solutions provider. So as you can see, we're a global company located in 18 countries. We got over 1,000 employees with over 1,300 customers. So we our partnerships include SuccessFactors, Oracle, TalentSoft, and Workday. So we really focus on 3 lines of businesses: advising, implementing, and then post-go live services through our Run business line. And as I mentioned before, yeah, we're a global company with a lot of experience in different areas of HRS. Next slide. And then I'll do some introductions on myself and Tracy. So my name is Anna Elliott. I'm responsible for business development and marketing at HR Path here in the US. We also have here Tracy. So she's our lead time and attendance and workforce software consultant at HR Path, and she's located in Canada. And she'll be the one presenting to you today. So I will now pass it over to Tracy to get started on the presentation. And again, please feel free to ask any questions you may have in the chat box.
Thank you, Anna. And again, I apologize for the technical difficulties, and we'll try to get this show on the road. So today we're going to talk about time and attendance implementation tips and tricks. Our first discussion topic would be, why are we going to implement a time and attendance system? What drives an employer or a corporation to decide that they need to do some time and attendance implementation? We'll discuss, once they've made that decision, about building a project team, defining business requirements, then how to evaluate and select a time and attendance software, and then what the implementation itself, very high level, would actually look like. So let's start our discussion today by asking the question, why do companies might choose to actually implement a time and attendance software? So whether a company is experiencing an increasing population growth of their employees, or need to deal with a complex collective bargaining units or company policies, there are multiple employee relation issues that all employers encounter, and companies may consider implementing a time and attendance software to resolve these concerns. So a recent study released by Mitre Finch listed the top 5 employee relation issues as adequate safety in the workplace, conflict management, hours and wages, annual leave, and timekeeping issues. Now, while time and attendance cannot resolve all of these issues, it can certainly provide you some tools to help ease the way. Now, adequate safety in the workplace. Every business owner's worst nightmare is to have an injury or an accident happen to one of their employees while they're on the job. Now, this includes making sure, there should be a true matter what the industries, this should not matter regardless of what industry you are in. And it includes making sure that all proper safety equipment that is used and security measures are in place. However, you'll say, well, where does time and attendance help in a situation like this? Well, safety in the workplace, if there is an emergency where you had to evacuate, to make sure that you had everybody accounted for, if you had a report that was tracking who had swiped in or out at the exits, and you were able to quickly pull that data from your time and attendance system, that you would know that everybody had evacuated in that state of emergency. So it can help. It certainly can't answer all the problems when it comes to workplace safety, but it can give you that simple tool of knowing that if you do have an emergency, that everybody has vacated premises. And conflict management. Conflict management can happen in any environment, and in the workplace is certainly no different. So disputes between employees or a direct disagreement between an employee and a business owner are situations that occur frequently. So one of the situations you can have is where a manager and an employee are disagreeing about a person's attendance, the number of sick occurrences, the number of late occurrences. And your time and attendance software can produce reports, on-screen reports, notifications, all kinds of tools in the system that would help a manager and an employee communicate and resolve those issues. Now, hours and wages are one of the things that we normally would associate with payroll, and time and attendance, of course, does help with that. So if you're having disputes on payday where an employee is disagreeing with how much overtime they have logged or the hours that they have worked, you're probably finding that your HR, your payroll administrators are spending an awful lot of time going over time cards with employees or managers trying to resolve these issues. Sorry. One of the things the time and attendance system can do for you there is when an employee is completing their time card, they are, in effect, at the end of their pay period, electronically acknowledging the hours that they have worked each day. And the system should be then showing them how much overtime and any other premiums that they have logged so that when those hours are transmitted over to payroll, you're not going to have as many issues to resolve once the paychecks are printed and handed out. And another thing the time and attendance system will do would give the employees the tools to keep track and manage their own schedules, and this is providing them an efficient way to do so. Okay. So one of the questions we ask is, does your employee know what the company's leave policy is? Are you sure your policy is in accordance with federal, provincial, or state laws? And if your answer is no to any of those questions, well, then maybe you're not currently using a leave management system software. And this could leave the door open to annual leave disputes, employees coming in and disagreeing with the payout balance at the end of the year or how much they're entitled to use, or they're trying to take the Christmas holidays off and they've got no time left, but they think that they do. So perhaps when it comes to annual leave, if you provide every employee with a self-service access to the policies and to real-time leave balances, plus a paperless request process system that an annual leave or time management system would provide you, you can alleviate these issues and improve your employee relations. And the last but not least of our 5 hot topics here when it comes to disgruntled employee relations is timekeeping issues. So if you are requiring your employees to come into the office and clock in or out every day, do you find that they become lax on the issue or that they have coworkers buddy punching when they are running late? For those of you who are not familiar with the term buddy punching, what happens in some environments is, let's just say Joe's running a little late. He'll run in, say, hey, Frank, can you punch me in? I'm just going to park the car. And then they go park the car, and then they stop for a coffee in the cafeteria. Maybe they hit the break room for a cigarette. And it's a delayed time till when they actually start working. So their buddy Frank has punched them in, and they are now being paid for those hours when actually they weren't really working on the job yet. So another thing that you can do with the time and attendance is you can allow employees to track their time and communicate their attendance issues from smart devices. So if you can provide kiosks throughout, you can allow them access to mobile. You can set up a kiosk throughout the plant where they or the office, and people can start just clocking in and recording their time using a number of clocking devices, and that will reduce the amount of timekeeping errors that we have in the system. You can also avoid federal wage and hour violations by having a system that is going to track hours and manage overtime calculations and ensure that you keep in compliance with any legislative changes and calculations that you are required to manage. Okay, so I think with our top 5 relations, keeping in mind that time and attendance is not going to resolve all of your issues. Conflict management might be a tough one to sell when it comes to a time and attendance system, but there are some tools around conflict management and safety in the workplace that we can provide to help you reduce those. By having a time and attendance do your calculations for you, presenting them to the employees and giving the employees some ownership around tracking their own time, tracking their own leave, and staying on top of that, implementing a time and attendance system can certainly help you alleviate these issues. So when we talk about time and attendance, we say, okay, well, what's the importance of time and attendance? You can identify, document, automate all of your HR rules, any legislative regulations in your region, whether you're federally regulated in both Canada and the States, or if you are provincially or you have state rules that you have to observe. A time and attendance system would be built to manage those, and it's something you wouldn't have to think about. Also, if you are multinational, if you're global, a time and attendance system could be configured to recognize where the employee is actually working and ensure that the rules, whether it's somebody's in Manitoba versus Quebec, or if they're in Florida versus California, or maybe you have a small workforce, you're based out of the US or Canada, but you have a contingent in Germany, a time and attendance system can certainly understand where the employee is and apply the appropriate regional rules to make sure that you stay compliant. Another important factor with time and attendance is you want to be able to provide your payroll department with timely and accurate transactional data when they're calculating pay statements. So by allowing a time and attendance system to manage the rules for you, that will alleviate the work on the payroll department. Once they get comfortable with the system and they actually trust that the system is doing everything that it needs to do, then the payroll department can breathe a little sigh of relief and move on to other tasks at hand. And then optimizing an organization's method of collecting time or streamlining. So that's our next topic. So if you're standardizing and capturing your time in a similar fashion, so whether an employee is clocking on a wall clock, if they're using a web clock or a mobile device to clock in, you can apply rules such as gracing and rounding right at those features so that your rules are being applied evenly, consistently, and without prejudice. So you're not at the mercy of a manager or a time administrator applying some judgmental leeway. A clock punch is a clock punch, and it applies those rules, as I said, without prejudice. There's also techniques where you can apply restrictions on increments of time. So if you have a salaried group where all you're really requiring is that they record in and out, sorry, not in and out time, exception time. So basically your salary person is going to go along, tickety-boos. They're going to be paid salary until they decide they're going to take a vacation. So maybe they're going to take a vacation for half of a day or 1 hour to attend a doctor's appointment. Those restrictive rules can be put into the system based on your company policies. So if your company says vacation should be used in increments of a day or half a day or 1 hour or 15 minutes, a time and attendance, again, can enforce those rules for you. So the next step in our ladder of importance, a payroll and time management. Overhead costs are one of the highest liabilities a company has to manage. So you can increase productivity by allowing the time and attendance software the ability to manage rules for you. It frees up the payroll and finance teams from manually calculating timesheets and reduces payroll errors and stress. And then we follow that up by saying, okay, you provide your employees with a self-service real-time tool that can reduce the number of calls to managers and payroll administrators that they would need to handle. So employees are not going to be constantly calling and say, how much vacation do I have left? When is my vacation going to be allotted? You know, when I get that, how many hours can I take next June 4th off? They can go into the system, they can view their timesheets, they can view their leave balances, and they can make those decisions for themselves. Also, visibility to online schedules will allow employees the ability to plan time off in advance. They can see their leave balances, and they don't need to call HR and payroll for verification of the information because it's right there on the self-service tool. So one of the things that we have to consider too, when we're thinking, do we need to do a time and attendance implementation? If we do computerized calculations and we look at union collective agreements, company policy, legislative requirements, while minimizing compliance risk, if we put the time and attendance system in and we have it do all of those calculations for us, we know that we're going to be compliant. We know the computer is going to do those calculations for us, and we know we're going to be in good with the union because we're observing the agreement and sticking to the collective bargaining agreement, and also our company policies. So by capturing our job costing, our time off, our absences, our overtime hours at the source, at the time clock, or at the time sheet, this data then can be tallied into one report and sent to downstream systems for processing. And there's no need then to correlate data from multiple systems to provide month-end, year-end, quarter-end reporting. Okay, so that was our downstream. So our downstream data is our last step on our importance of time and attendance. Now, one thing I'm sure we can all agree, when we start thinking about doing a time and attendance implementation, it can definitely be a very complex undertaking, depending on the complexity of your organization. And without the correct planning, it could go sideways really quickly. So if you don't have correct planning, then your project can run behind schedule, can run over budget, and may not really engage the right stakeholders in the company. So on that note, we would talk about how do we get started? So the first thing the company has to do is identify, hey, we have some issues with our employees. Maybe we have an annual leave issue. Maybe we have inconsistent timekeeping practices. We think we're going to need to put in a time and attendance system. And then they would establish a budget, establish a timeline, and then they have to figure out, well, who's going to manage all this for us? And they would engage a team of folks within the company to embark in this journey together. So when you decide that you're going to do a project like this, you have to make sure that you have the right team members. Unlike any other projects, A time and attendance project touches a lot of the organization, probably every person in the organization, because now they're going to be required to record their time in a new method. Other departments are going to be getting their information in a new way, hopefully a better format. So it's a good idea to conduct a high-level analysis and determine which departments are going to be impacted more, so you can start thinking about change management. And then when you're moving through the process and you're building this team, you want to make sure that each department has a representative to speak for them when those issues come. So we want to establish the team, and we're going to start at the top. So we're going to start with an executive sponsor. The executive sponsor is sometimes called the project sponsor or the senior responsible owner, and it's really a role in project management. Usually it's a senior member of the project board and often the chair, and the project sponsor will be the senior executive in a corporation, often just below the board level. And this person is responsible to the business for the success of the project. Okay, so they have a big stake in the project. After we identify our executive sponsor, then we're going to have to talk about the steering committee. Now, a steering committee is a body within an enterprise that supports the steering of its actions. Pretty good, right? And its main concern is making strategic decisions concerning future projects and the enterprise investment projects. Okay, so when we start talking about the steering committee with relation to time and attendance, they're there to help the team make strategic decisions. They're also there to handle any confusion. Okay, so if there's any discord amongst the team about what the project is supposed to accomplish, it's the job of the steering committee to drive that and make sure that the confusion is cleared up and there's a clear path forward. Also, the steering committee is there and they're going to display impartiality. So if some issues arise, it's up to the steering committee to sort through all of the evidence and decide what's fact and what is fiction and render a decision. So when you start talking about what you want in this new software ecosystem, it's up to the steering committee to sort of sort out what we really need as opposed to what the nice to haves are, and they are to be impartial in making those decisions. And it's also up to the steering committee to ensure the completion of the project. So they're really making sure that the project follows the critical path and it is successfully completed in the proper timeline. So now we have our executive sponsor, we have our steering committee, and now we're going to look to having a project manager. So our project manager is a professional in the field of project management. They have the responsibility of planning, procurement, and execution of a project. They have the understanding of the scope of the project. They have a defined start and finish date. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in, this project manager is going to be able to do these functions. They're not necessarily a subject matter expert in implementation of time and attendance. They may not understand time and attendance and all of the downstream systems that it's going to affect, but they should have a good understanding of project management and be able to keep the crew on task, on time, and on budget. And then the last link in our team is our subject matter experts, or our SMEs, or domain expert, they're also called. So these are the people who actually do the day-to-day work and understand the delicate intricacies of each position. So for all of the departments that your time and attendance implementation is going to touch, you should have representation at some level of those departments so that there's an understanding of the integration and the demand that the time and attendance system is there to meet. Okay, so now we know we have a need for a time and attendance system. We have an understanding of what that is going to solve for the company. We have a team, and now we have to stop and think, well, what functionality do we actually want to put in place? Quite often a time and attendance system will offer more than just time tracking. And depending on the complexity of the organization and of the workforce, you may want to extend the functionality beyond just time capture. So a decision is going to need to be made in which method you're going to implement to capture time. Okay? Are you going to use wall clocks? Are you going to use direct entry on a timesheet? Are you going to use a positive time or an exception time only methodology? All of these decisions will drive the requirements as we move forward. And how are your employees going to access the system? Are they going to use SSO? Are they going to use a direct login? Or are you going to implement biometric authentication? If you are in an organization that has a challenge with buddy punching, a biometric option is always good. Hardly likely that Joe is going to cut off his finger and hand it to Frank to go punch him in early while he parks the car and grabs a coffee. So these decisions need to be made upfront and decide that, you know, globally, or maybe your salary folk don't need to do biometric and your hourly folk do. So, you know, when you start thinking about what solutions is going to start to look like, these are some of the things that you have to consider. Activity-based accounting or job costing functionality in a software may be considered as well. So when you're implementing the functionality, it allows the information to be captured at the source, on the timesheet, or at the clock. The information can then be captured. So you can have an employee select a different job, a different position, a different location, whatever your job costing looks like, that can be done at the clock directly on the timesheet. And then the information can be correlated and sent downstream for reporting. So a lot of organizations in today's time are starting to look towards mobile solutions. So the mobile functionality is based on need. You can provide an employee with the ability to clock in, or just simply give them the option to look at their timesheet, to look at their schedule, and maybe perform some online time off request practice. Or you can give managers the ability to process anything and approve timesheets, approve time off requests, look at schedules, and administrators really wouldn't be using the mobile function anywhere past just maybe approving timesheets. Some solutions even provide the ability to use geofencing. So that way, when your employee clocks in and says he's at work, because the geographic area is drawn out and identified to the mobile device, he's not really clocking in from the beach in the Bahamas. Another one of the solutions that your time and attendance software might give you is absence management. Now, absence management can be a great time-saving tool. It can provide the employees with real-time access to leave balances. It can manage accruals, manage bank payouts upon termination, and most solutions that you would review would provide a paperless time off management process. Always looking for solutions to save the paper. And last but not least, your solution might require that you're looking for some sort of employee scheduling. Systematic employee scheduling provides the opportunity for increased automated functionality. So your system can be programmed to manage rule-based statutory holiday payments. It can look at fatigue management. It can manage, increased absence management functionality. So For example, if you have a rule that says your employee must work the day before the holiday and the day after the holiday to get paid for the holiday, your time scheduling system would know which days of the month are the holidays and be able to apply those rules based on an employee's schedule. So when you're starting to evaluate software and you're looking forward to what is it that you're trying to implement, what functionality that you are looking for, these are the types of solutions that you might want to start thinking about. So we have identified some employee relations issues that we'd like to resolve. We have reviewed and considered what functionality we would like to implement. We have a project team. Well, now what do we do? So let the documentation begin. And this is just in preparation for your implementation. This might be the beginning of your RFI or RFP. But what you need to do is really engage your business analyst in the very early stages of the project and start reviewing your internal documentation. So you need to step back and identify which departments have a stake in the game. And once you identify the departments, maybe it's a good idea to go back to your team and make sure that you have a team member represented on your project team for each of the departments that you have identified in this first step. Then you would need to think about what other softwares is this time and attendance software going to integrate into? Do I have a third-party payroll system that I want to transmit my data to? Do I have an accounting software package that I want to incorporate and send some downstream data to? Do I have any other systems that this time and attendance software might pull data from, an HR system, for example? So for each of those softwares that you are identifying, you're going to have to make sure that you get involved with your in-house IT and start thinking about file layouts and all that fun stuff when it comes to software implementation. Okay, so that's step one. Identify your current system, all your touch points, whether they're coming in or out, and make sure that you have representation on your team for each department that you are engaging in the project. The next step is to identify your time rules. So implementing a new system is a great time to update any out-of-date documents or properly define any company policies. Quite often companies fall into the practice of, well, that's because we've always done it this way practice. This is a good opportunity to clarify those processes and document them. You need to document any time transaction rules, include examples of each specific rule. So when you start thinking about, well, we have full-time people who take stat holidays, we take part-time people who take stat holidays, we take union people who take stat holidays, and each one of those groups has a different rule for the holiday. Those all have to be documented and specific examples of what that should look like, what the input should look like and what the output should look like, and how do you know who that person is to apply that rule to them. So document all of that. Make sure that you document and capture any regional legislative requirements. So if you are practicing in multiple states, if you're in multiple countries, if you're in Canada, the US, several states and several provinces, it's a good idea to identify what rules apply to which province and how you're going to identify which people belong in which rule in which province. And then collect your union CBA documents so that you can share those with your partner and implementation team. And then the final step of the documentation is, well, it's important to classify your employee population. Time rules are based usually on employee characteristics, such as they are unionized. Maybe you have multiple unions. Quite often too, hourly employees may be required to clock in and clock out each day, whereas maybe your salary employees only report exception time? Do you have any grandfathered rules in this system? So maybe you've implemented a new leave policy, but you have employees who have been with the company since the beginning of time, and they did not get the new leave policy. They are going to continue with their original leave policy because it might be more generous. And are there any exceptions to these rules? So maybe you have a salary person who gets X number of weeks, but they have negotiated an extra week of vacation upon hire. There's an exception to your rule. So all of this information needs to be documented and captured. All right, so moving along. So this gets us to the requirements gathering process. The requirements gathering process, it's good to start that after you've done your internal documentation. So sometimes, depending on the project and how quickly things go, these things can happen concurrently. It can cause a little bit of chaos, but it can be done. So what we're doing in the requirements gathering process then is taking all of the information that you feel is related to the time and attendance, and you're going to put it into what's called a BRD, or a business requirement document. So the BRD needs to have a few features to it. It needs to be traceable, so that if you are referring back to your business requirements document, you don't have to say, well, you know, the statutory holiday rule for St. John Baptiste Day for union employees, well, that's the rule I'm talking about. But if you had some sort of numbering system or some sort of matrix attached to your BRD, then you could just refer to my stat holiday BRD, union tab, cell BRD 0012. And then that's where the rule would be. So that would be the traceability part of it. So when you start with it, we're going to look at your timekeeping and capture procedures and policies. We need to make sure that all of that things that you have identified that you need to have in the system, we're now going to document that in a way that we can follow it. We're also going to capture all your current pay practices. So this would list anything like your termination practice, your new hire practice. If you're transferring people from one department to another, do they gain benefit from that in terms of like a new bank? Well, they couldn't bank overtime before, but now they can, or they used to be able to bank overtime and now they can't. We need to capture all those current pay practices. We also need to make sure we capture and document in the BRD any functional and non-functional requirements, and we need to reinforce those with data and facts. Sounds complicated. So here, what we're talking about, functional and non-functional, we want to see if what users are going to be using the system. And when those users log in, what features do they get to see? Also, we want to have provided here specific examples of each accrual policy. So if you have a sick bank, a vacation bank, a stat holiday bank, every third Monday bank, whatever banks your organization has, we need specific accruals and to understand what that looks like. We also need here under functional and non-functional requirements, contextual data and facts, examples of each premium calculation. So if your company is using call-in minimums or stat holiday rules, we need to know what the call-in minimum is. If they work 4 hours, do they get paid for 2? Is it double time? Is it overtime? How many instances can they have? We need all that detail. Now, downstream impacts of requirements and impacted stakeholders. So what they're saying here is there any change management needed for the other departments directly affected by the new time and attendance software? Are there adjustments to the new hire and termination practices? Are there any new accounting reports? What can we document here, and what does that look like going forward, and what do we need to do with that? So, and again, if we get to the requirements gathering and we realize that we have missed a connection, we may need to pull in another SME so that that person can provide us with information on what we're talking about. Now, the success factor that will satisfy the requirement. So there's a hard one to say. And the implementation team will need to be able to understand how we quantify a successful implementation. So there has to be some sort of measurement tool. Quite often, it will be an issue log. And what you can determine then is if there are no critical issues on the issue log when you are ready to say go or no go on the go live, then it's a go. But if there are issues, then that might warrant pushing out the go live date if that's even an opportunity. Okay, last, risks and assumptions. Risks and assumptions. So in your BRD or in your solution design document, what you would like to do is list all the risks and assumptions that you can understand from the beginning of the project, and this may get updated as the project progresses along. Risks would be, are there any team vacations? Are there any pending leaves? Are there any third-party software interactions that you have no control over? Any assumptions that you would list would be, for example, all requirements listed in the BRD will be delivered as stated. Any additional requirements are considered out of scope and may affect project timeline. Milestones that are missed may affect project timelines. Those are the types of things that you want to list in your risks and assumptions. Technology and integration, you need to identify, again, all of the downstream and upstream systems. You need to be able to define a timeline for when data is to be delivered, when test data is to be delivered, and you need to be able to have documents detailing file layouts for all the softwares. And the final thing in our requirements gathering would be a map of the current system. Nope, I didn't go forward. There we go. A map of the current system and the system as we wish it to be. And the idea then is to be able to point out the differences or any touch points that may have gone away or new touch points. So just at the end of the project, then you understand that you have been able to touch. Maybe that's all right. Okay. Okay, so our next step then would be evaluating and selecting a time and attendance software. We're going to go through this really quickly because of the tardy beginning. We are running quickly out of time. So one of the first things that you want to do then, and when you're looking at a software, you want to make sure that it has all the functionality. You want to check that the vendor, the software product, that their reputation in the marketplace. You want to make sure it's the right fit for your organization. So when you've identified all the functionality you have, does this software have it? If you're a business that grows through acquisition or just organically, will this software grow with you? And of course, the all-important price. What's it going to cost? Is this something that is within the budget that we envisioned when we started talking about this project? Does it have the functionality? Does it have the reporting capability? Is it actually going to meet our needs? Availability of strong documentation. So does it have an online help? Does it have manuals, user manuals? Number 7, ease of use and implementation. So is it a tricky implementation? Normally time and attendance, because of all the complicated rules that are involved, can be a complex implementation. But once the system is implemented, how easy is it to use? Is it intuitive for the end user? And finally, compatible with other softwares and hardware. So if you are only implementing a new or adding to a current system, does this new software have the ability to integrate, or is it going to be difficult to share information upstream and downstream? Okay, finally, we are almost here. We have identified our functionality. We're picking our software. We have got our requirements. We have got our BRDs and everything's ready to go. Okay, let's get her done. So now it's time to do the implementation. So the kickoff, you get your project team together. You get it with your partner project team, and everybody sits down and they decide what the project's going to look like, what we're implementing, what's our timeline, what are our milestones, and then we start to build. So once the project is actually built, it's a good idea to do, train the trainer. Okay, so if you do train the trainer, that means that your vendor is going to train a few select people in your organization on how to use the software. And then those folks in turn would go out and train the employee population. And after you do train the trainer, those people who have been trained should be doing testing. And you need to test. You need to have a plan. You need to have test scripts. It needs to be traceable back to your BRD to make sure that you are testing every nuance of the functionality. There needs to be a traceability matrix to say that the tests are passing and failing. You would work with your vendor to have a software or some mechanism for reporting any defects that you perceive in the software that has been delivered. And then once you are done test, so you're going to test the units, the users, the calculations, you're going to test the integrations, and then you're going to test the whole system, one, probably parallel, maybe two, depending on how comfortable you are, cradle to grave, to make sure that the system is working and there's nothing unexpected going to happen. If you happen to have different payroll cycles, then you want to make sure that you capture each of those payroll cycles. What I mean by that is, if you happen to have a payroll cycle where your benefits administration happens in the second cycle, you want to make sure that you capture the first and second cycle to make sure that there's no surprises. And then after you're done test, you do go live. You work with your implementation partner to make sure that your project goes live, that your users are supported, and that you have a period of time after the software has been implemented and your users are active in the system, that you have the ability then to have some support in the event that there's something creeps up unexpectedly. Okay, so that was quite a rush through there at the end, and I apologize for that. Is there any questions out there?
Looks like there's no questions that have been asked. So
Wonderful.
we can go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, Tracy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We really hope that you found this webinar useful, and we're happy to help you further with your time and attendance project. So feel free to reach out to us if you're interested. Please note too that we have our automated testing webinar happening in February. So the February 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll send out some more information on that. And as I mentioned earlier, we will send the slide deck over to you after this webinar. And if you have any questions, please feel free to respond. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. And thanks again for joining us.